Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on the second part of Under the Feet of Jesus. There are still some of the same themes that we talked about from the first part that continue into the second part, but there were a couple of things that I wanted to highlight from this second part, namely the scene in the medical clinic, and of course, the ending and what is the symbolism of the barn. So we see in the scene at the medical clinic, how in this part, the author juxtaposes the white nurse's lifestyle, comfortable middle-class suburban life, against the extreme poverty and its impact on Estrella and her family. We really definitely see the distinct differences between the two, and the two very different lives then that they're each having. The author also juxtaposes different economic systems where Perfecto offers bartering his services in exchange for the medical assistance, while the nurse can only imagine exchange in terms of dollars and cents. She seems to just not be able to get the clue that they don't have any cash, the very limited cash they have, they need, and isn't willing at all to consider or imagine that there's another way in which her services can be paid for. And you also see the condescending attitude of the nurse, thinking she's doing them a favor by charging them $10 instead of $15 because times are hard, right? So it's this way in which she seems to be sympathetic, but really has no clue as to what hard times are like for Estrella and her family. So this is the moment where Estrella's consciousness really begins to awaken, realizing the injustice that was built into the system that kept people like her in extreme poverty, marginalized from mainstream society, and unable to access resources like medical care. And so you really see it in this quote where she recognizes in the way the nurse is treating her and the way the nurse is looking at her and her family, that this is how society sees her, right? But also realizing that her value, right? The value of her labor and her family's labor, and how significant it is in allowing people like the nurse to have her life. And she recalls the image of the tar pits. She remembered the tar pits, energy money, the fossilized bones of energy matter, how bones made oil and oil made gasoline. The oil was made from their bones, and it was their bones that kept the nurse's car from not halting on some highway, kept her on her way to Daisy Field to pick up her boys at 6. It was their bones that kept the air conditioning in the cars humming, that kept them moving on the long dotted line on the map. Their bones. Why couldn't the nurse see that? Estrella had figured it out. The nurse owed them as much as they owed her. So it's this moment of realization for Estrella that her demanding, as she does next, that the money be returned, makes sense, right? That this nurse and her entire lifestyle is dependent on people like Estrella. And so the nurse owes her more than Estrella owes the nurse for her very limited medical attention that she provides to Alejo. So Estrella turns to violence in this moment, where she finds another powerful function for Perfecto's tools, using the crowbar as a physical threat to get what she needs from institutions of power, as represented by the white nurse. She threatens the nurse's objects, the things in her vicinity, but not the nurse herself. Yet the nurse feels physically threatened. As it says in the text, she saw the nurse trembling before her. And we see sort of this, development within Estrella, where it says she felt like two Estrellas. One was a silent phantom who obediently marked a circle with a stick around the bungalow as the mother had requested, while the other held the crowbar and the money. And so you start seeing sort of this split within her, where she's seemingly leaving behind the Estrella that just is accepting of her conditions and her family's conditions, and the Estrella that is willing to do something, however extreme, to change her circumstances. She also learns that the threat of violence is the only way people like her ever get heard. As she says in the quote, they make you that way. You talk and talk and talk to them and they ignore you. But you pick up a crowbar and break the pictures of their children, and all of a sudden they listen real fast. So again, sort of becoming aware of her position in society. And you see sort of, again, this symbolism of this newfound power that she finds within herself, where they finally make it to the hospital in Corazon, and as she's coming out of the hospital, the glass doors are open, right? And this is something that her younger siblings have never seen. So it's this sort of, embracing, however elusive, this newfound power, symbolized by her magical power to make the doors at the hospital open on their own, where the children sort of look at her as having power to make glass split in two. So she's able to have the power to do that, then what else can she possibly do, right? So it's also this moment of possibility and hopefulness. You also have this moment here when they arrive to the hospital, where Estrella says thank you to Perfecto, even though he wasn't willing to go along with this whole process of trying to get Alejo medical help. He does it anyway. And she's the first person to ever express gratitude to him. So you get the sense of what this means in the bigger scheme of things, in the bigger context, what this means to Perfecto. As it says in the quote, he had given this country his all, and in this land that used his bones for kindling, in this land that never once in the 30 years he lived and worked, never once said thank you, this young woman who could be his granddaughter had said the words with such honest gratitude. He was struck by how deeply these words touched him. He hadn't even realized how much he needed just to hear appreciation for his years of work and sacrifice. And again, we see this imagery of oil and gasoline, and how his bones, right, his body is used to fuel the economy of this country. And so we also get here to the meaning of the barn, since the text begins and ends with the barn. And we also see multiple moments throughout the text where the barn appears. And so there's multiple ways in which the barn has been interpreted by other readers and scholars. And so I'm here offering sort of a list of the different ways in which it has been talked about, but also because I'm curious to see out of all of these, which ones you agree with, or if there are other interpretations outside of this listing here that you have of what you think the barn ultimately means in the novel. So the barn has been perceived as a place of belonging for Estrella. The place is also often read as a sign of her development into womanhood. This is where she goes when she feels the need to escape from the fields or to reflect on her life. And so this is one place where she has a space to herself, right? The other kids aren't around, her family isn't around, the fields aren't around. And so it serves as a place of belonging for her. But the barn is also where Estrella runs to after her intimate encounter with Alejo beneath the truck. It is a place of solace and comfort when she thinks, while at the medical clinic, all she wanted was to find a deep, dark, quiet place like the barn to cry. So this is where, right, it's like as if the barn was a part of her growth and development throughout the novel. Every kind of significant moment, she connects back to the barn. The barn has also been talked about as a haunted space containing the ghostly past of migrant workers. We see at the beginning Alejo and especially his cousin Gumecindo believing that they hear screams coming from the barn, right? There's also sort of this ghostly presence of the hairlip boy that happens earlier in the novel. And so the barn has been also talked about as not just significant to those particular characters in that particular moment, but really represented the longer history and ancestry of workers that this country has relied on to sort of build the economy on, whether it's migrant farm workers of Mexican American descent, or whether it's African Americans doing slavery, right? Really sort of this whole story being haunted by this bigger story of labor and laborers' bodies. The barn has also been read as having spiritual significance. It's described at one point as a cathedral of a building, right? So it's often also connected to spaces of religion and spirituality. The barn has also been read, and even Estrella makes this connection as representing the body of the immigrant worker, especially in this quote where they're considering tearing down the barn, where she thinks, is that what happens? Estrella thought, people just use you until you're all used up, then rip you into pieces when they're finished using you. So she sees sort of the barn as also representing the body of workers, her body, her mother's body. We see a number of points in the novel where this connection is made between the crippling body of the barn and the crippling bodies of the farm workers. At the end of the novel, we see Estrella, who again means star in English, standing atop of the barn, feeling empowered after the incident in the clinic, serving as a beacon of hope for her people. So the imagery there, again, is very spiritual. She's sort of this Christ-like figure that is standing on top of this barn that is constantly being described by Perfecto in particular as dangerous, as it could fall apart anytime. And here she is atop of it, feeling empowered after this experience, and feeling in a way hopeful of future possibilities. You also see her conquering the barn, climbing the rusted chain, reaching the trap door, pushing the trap door with her body. So again, sort of this culmination of this journey that she's been on, where she overcomes these physical kinds of oppressions, right? And is able to conquer them and come and be on top of the world, really. She also replaces the altar under which the family's documented belonging has been protected all this time, where it says, the termite softened shakes crunch beneath her bare feet like the serpent under the feet of Jesus. This is also right after the statue, right, on the mother's altar falls, and the head of the statue breaks apart, right? So it's almost like she's simultaneously replacing, right, this altar and this statue of Jesus that has been protecting the family. It's almost like she can now be the one to protect and stand up for the family. So this sort of parallel is being made in here, and describing her and her standing over the serpent, right? The same way that the statue appears as standing over a serpent. And so in this last quote that ends the novel, it says, Estrella remained as immobile as an angel standing on the verge of faith, like the chiming bells of the great cathedrals. She believed her heart powerful enough to summon home all those who strayed. So again, she is sort of taking on this sort of Jesus figure, not just in a spiritual kind of way, but really in the way that the statue of Jesus has been serving throughout the novel, which has been as a protector of their belonging, right? Those documents. But she doesn't need to stand on top of the documents anymore, right? She herself has now embodied that sense of belonging, of having voice, of being able to speak back to and challenge the conditions in which she lives and works. Right? So that's the end of my lecture for this week. But again, these are all multiple ways in which the barn has been talked about, the way the scene in the medical clinic has been talked about. I'm really looking forward to hear your thoughts and your interpretations, as well as how the themes from the first part continue to develop during the second part. So that ends the lecture for this week. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Take care.